Well, hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 18 of the Apothecary Diaries. And I'm so glad I got to look at the comments as quickly as I did. Be Happy, the moderator, shout out to her for checking super quickly, because I was like, hey, would you care to check those comments? Because I was like a drug addict. I was like, I really need to watch the next episode. Because it's just so good. And in the meantime, while I was waiting, I was also reading The Last Eunuch in China, which we're slowly getting to the final stages of. It definitely feels like it. So get that microphone hooked in there better. But anyway, so yeah. Speaking of this series, last episode ended on kind of a cliffhanger where it seems like Jinshi kind of maybe is putting two and two together, and I don't know if MaoMao knows about Lakan. She hasn't met Lakan yet. She kind of knows of him, but I don't think they've fully been introduced. I think Lakan knows exactly his relation to MaoMao, and I think he's teasing Jinshi about it, and Jinshi's gonna be like, what the fudge? So, and I don't think he knows that Jinshi likes MaoMao. I think there's a lot of questions, and we're not gonna be conjecturing. We're gonna let's see if the evidence plays out, but I have a lot of theories, as you all know, and we're gonna see if those play out in the next couple of episodes or not. So we'll see how that goes. But before we dive into that, we need to talk about the book. We need to talk about a couple comments here. William Pina noted that MaoMao came up with the theory that Jinshi is the emperor's brother and son, though it's pretty plausible for us, the audience, right? But she dismissed it immediately as something so ridiculous it could not be true. That's why she acts the way that she does. And that's my problem. I know that. I know that this is her theory, and I know that she thinks it's silly and she's not believing in it, but we, the audience, know it's very likely, right? Because everything else is pointing to, my thing is, I think that the difference between light novels and anime is in the light novels, when she's coming up with this theory, you read it on the page and you're like, okay, it's just a theory. We don't exactly know. But then in the anime, when they literally show Aduo looking back at Jinshi like he's her son, with that visual, and that's not from MaoMao's perspective necessarily, I'm like, show. I think sometimes my only qualm with the show is I think sometimes it doesn't exactly know how to properly adapt the light novel material, and that's not necessarily its fault because it's really hard to do that. But like we talked about a few episodes ago, I think that's one of the weaker points of the show, but it's not enough to distract me. It's just very frustrating when I'm like, but the show's telling us this is true, and MaoMao's like, well, it's just a theory, and I'm like, I just want to gently shake her by the shoulders, but that's okay. And then Anime Annie had a couple comments as well. Anime Annie says, they really are teasing us with so many of us noticing MaoMao's arm and so many people in the show noticing, but not Jinshi. And yeah, Jinshi doesn't have any reason to notice, but they are teasing us with that. And I'm just waiting for it to all, like, he's going to find out. He's going to find out. It's just a matter of time. So it's just very frustrating as the viewer because you're like, well, when's it going to happen? And the show doesn't feel the need to answer that question for us, which is leaving us where we are. She also says, in regards to the choice of the hair, said material for the underwear, back in episode 13, it could have some cultural and philosophical relevance. Sure. No, she says, I know certain Chinese ethnic groups had very strong beliefs about hair, which is why they had such long hairstyles. And you two need to be good over there. As to the philosophical relevance, I believe there is a teaching by Confucius that hair is given by your parents, and so you should not damage it. There is the possibility that they made the underwear with strands of their hair that naturally came out while they were brushing, potentially a way of showing great devotion and loyalty, but definitely a strange gift to your crush. Yeah, these girls seemed like Harry Styles fans that were like, I'm going to give you this gift of our hair underwear, and Jinshi's like, thanks, but no thanks. He's just, and I don't blame him for not being into that. And then finally, Anime Annie notes the garden and gardener metaphor is equal parts a fitting description for the inner palace, whilst also giving us modern females a bit of the ick factor. Yes. Women being likened to flowers, objects that are momentarily admired and then typically removed or binned when they wilt, definitely adds to the idea of women being an abundant commodity in the palace. I love flower symbolism and I'm all for certain flowers representing certain characters, but there isn't the same kind of feeling of objectification as there is with the emperor's turn of phrase with Jinshi at the beginning. Yeah, that is something that I was like, I don't really think negatively towards the emperor really in any sense of the word, but when he was talking about Jinshi's role of being the gardener in his garden, it definitely objectifies all of the women there. And it's like, yeah, let's not. So I appreciate flower symbolism and I'm all for it. But like Anime Annie says, in a modern context, women are like, please don't objectify us and treat us like a commodity. We're not. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So as far as the book goes, as far as the book notes go, I do want to talk about chapter 10. I read all of chapter 10 today. It mainly talks about after Sun Yat-ting gets back to the Temple of Prosperity. He basically goes back there because you get a shelter. There's 3 meals a day. It's fine. And he meets up with some people. Like one is this eunuch named Chen Zeshan, which we've seen him throughout the story. Chen is like the one eunuch that took Sun Yat-ting in. He's always been nice to them. They've been best friends. And so he goes to stay with him. And a lot of eunuchs seem to be working for this man named Jia Kier is his name. And so Sun Yat-ting comes back. He really doesn't want to talk about his stay with the emperor this last time because he's not very proud of it. And he kind of wishes he'd never gone in the first place. But he gets to hang out with Chen. And they also go back to this eunuch named Liu Ziyu's, which we've seen him previously in the novel as well. And Liu, he lives with his wife, his son that I guess he had before he became a eunuch, and his daughter-in-law and grandson. And so they're all super nice. Like Liu's wife, she's just described as a simple peasant woman. And so because she's not like a snobby noblewoman, she treats Sun Yat-ting really nicely. And his daughter like makes him a new set of shoes. They have a really nice time there. But unfortunately, Liu, he ends up dying of a heart attack at age 55. So, I mean, this is back in the 40s. So his life expectancy, wasn't too great. But what ends up happening is they have this funeral procession, and what ends up happening from there is that on the way during the procession, one of the other eunuchs named Zong, he ends up having like this big shrine inducted to them. And everybody's like, why is this eunuch doing all these things for this other eunuch? And what we find out is that he actually like helped Liu quit gambling and helped him save money. And Liu had actually, while he was married, lost like $3,000 gambling. And Zong, this eunuch that had been working in the palace, like gave him the $3,000 and was like, you don't have to pay me back. We're friends. It's fine. And then they became best friends from then, and he quit gambling and helped out his family and all that. It's a really nice, warm story. It's really great. But from there, Sun Yat-ting's like, well, I don't exactly know what to do. And so a lot of the eunuchs are talking about working for Za, which is this guy that supposedly is his up-and-coming noble. And he's like, you should go work for him. So we get a little insight about Za. And I wanted to kind of read the book here. It says, during the reign of the Empress Dowager Shiji, we talked about her in this story, the Jia family staged a financial comeback because they'd lost a lot of money during the previous emperor's time. It says that Za Qier's father got in touch with a distant relative who was a court minister and through him offered an extravagant present to Gigi. The Empress Dowager gave the Jia family a handsome reward, monopoly of salt trades in Beijing and Jushui County in central Hebei. So yeah, just being like, oh, thanks for the gift. Here's a monopoly on one of the biggest trade industries in the country. And it's like, oh my God, Gigi, what the fudge? That woman, that empress, you give her money, you could compare her to some modern day politicians. I'm like, oh my God, crazy talk. But basically, such a monopoly meant enormous profits for the most inane businessmen, and the Jia family soon accumulated huge wealth. Za Qier grew up to be a typical profligate son with no business acumen, but accustomed to wanton extravagance, meaning he was a shit businessman, but he had lots of money. In addition to a number of ordinary servants, he had already 2 eunuchs to wait on him before Sun Yat-ting came. What I thought was interesting was this next paragraph. It says, apart from the imperial palace, only the northern mansion and a few high-ranking Manchu princes employed eunuchs as house servants in the dozen years after the 1911 revolution. The situation changed abruptly after the mass dispersal of eunuchs in 1923. It then became fashionable for rich households in Beijing to hire eunuchs. For one thing, it did one's ego good to be waiting on eunuchs just like the emperor. Furthermore, it was customary now for rich men to have several concubines. Hiring eunuchs instead of male servants in the house seemed a good way to forestall undesirable liaisons. So I thought that was so insane. Like, because the emperor has been ousted and the Republic of China has come in, and it's not exactly considered, like a monarchy rule anymore, which it's an empire, it's different. But I thought the idea of the noble people being like, they wanted to be fashionable like the emperor, so let's hire people to be slaves. It's like, oh! And then the idea that all of these rich men were like starting to get concubines, and they were like, well, we don't want to risk something happening like what happened with the emperor, so we'll just hire eunuchs. And it's like, interesting indeed. So we then find out that Jia is kind of the worst. He's not a great human being at all. It says that the two other eunuchs in Jia's house, An and Ma, An's job was to light the opium pipes for Jia and his wives, and Ma was responsible for overseeing the meal service. So we'll talk about Ma here in a second, but basically what ends up happening is that Jia, he has a wife, but he doesn't like his wife nearly as much as his second concubine. His first wife, which is called his principal wife, quote unquote, only gave him a daughter. Sucks to be her. But the other concubine ends up giving him 5 sons and a daughter. And I'm like, okay, so she gets the more extravagant things because the family thinks she's providing for the family because she's having sons. It's about as messed up as it sounds. But anyway, Jia basically is described as spending money like water while neglecting his business. His financial situation kept going downhill. He began selling his housing property to cut back daily expenses. 3 eunuchs hired as a luxury took the brunt of this drawback. They were no longer served 3 meals a day, but had to pay their own food. So you find out later before that he was giving them like all this money and feeding them extravagantly, but then was like running out of money. And so, Ma and An end up leaving, and Sun Yao-ting is the only one left. And so Sun Yao-ting's getting ready to leave because he's like, I can't afford to stay here anymore. And Za's like, well, what do I do? And so what's interesting is that Sun Yao-ting actually gives this man advice on what to do to help his financial situation. He's like, well, why don't you just like cut back on going to these restaurants all the time and like sell some of this property and do all this? And it's so crazy because all throughout this story, Sun Yao-ting was always taught, like, you don't say anything. There's all these rules in the imperial palace. You don't have any right to do anything. You could die if you say the wrong thing in front of the emperor. And so he always kept his head down and did whatever he did to survive. But now that the tables have kind of turned and he's almost on an equal level with Za, not financially, but kind of status-wise, he's able to actually speak up and try to help this man, and it's kind of insane. And it ends up paying off for him, but we'll get to that in a second. So the Japanese surrendered in 1945, and it was followed by a few more turbulent years. Inflation gathered momentum as the national economy continually deteriorated. Even wealthy people had difficulty maintaining their extravagant lifestyles. Sun Yao-ting did not know what to do with his savings that he had kept, and so he went to the black market at Baitasi, where one could buy silver dollars with banknotes. In the early morning, a silver coin could sell for $100, but the price kept rising until it reached $500 by nightfall. This seemed to indicate that buying silver coins would be a good way of investment. However, Jia disagreed. He said, well, why do you want to buy silver dollars? The fabi is quite reliable. So Sun Yao-ting took Za's advice and bought a few fabi, but the paper currency that was issued by the Kuomintang government a few days later had a drastic devaluation and caused him to lose a sizable amount of money. And after that, Sun Yao-ting was like, wait, this guy knows nothing about business. I just listened to him because he was wealthy. That was a mistake. And so he didn't listen to him anymore and actually tried to convince Za to make some healthier investments as well. So the last part of the story that we find out is that Sun Yao-ting, he basically, how the story starts is that near the end of the year, he was forced to leave the household after an unfortunate incident. So this other eunuch named Dai gets hired, but Dai is not what Za wants. So he tries to convince Sun Yao-ting to stage a fight with him, And so Dai will he's like, oh, convince Dai to hit you, and then I'll use that to fire you because otherwise I don't have any other reason to do so. And Sun Yao Ting's like, okay. But it turns out he doesn't really like Dai. The two of them disagree on a lot of things. So they actually do get in a verbal altercation that leads to Sun Yao Ting getting in a fight with him. But then Za goes back on his word and fires both of them. And you're like, what? Why are you the worst? So Sun Yao Ting leaves. And then around the time of Lunar New Year, one of the eunuchs comes up to him and is like, hey, Za wants to hire you back. And Sun Yao Ting's like, of course he does. And so he wants to hire him back. And he's having this Lunar New Year's party. And he wants Sun Yao Ting to go before the Spring Festival and buy silver fish and purple crabs for the house feast on New Year's Eve. As the two delicacies were available only from the Weishui River in Tianjin, Ma had been sent there to get them the prior year. He bought the fish and crabs and tried his best to keep them alive, but they were all frozen to death on his return. This enraged Za, who had been waiting anxiously to win admiration from his guests with the rare dish. He cursed at Ma fiercely and dumped the dead fish and crabs into the courtyard. It had been one of the reasons that Ma had finally decided to quit. So Sun Yao Ting, after telling that story, is like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to go back to work for him because he's kind of an asshole and I don't want to do it. And so then the eunuch gives him $400 and is like, I'm going to come back and try to persuade you again. And he just keeps throwing money at Sun Yao Ting. And Sun Yao Ting's like, okay, fine. I need the money. I don't like this guy, but I'm kind of at a last resort. I'll go work for him. So he left for Tianjin without delay. Instead of going to see his younger brother, he headed straight for the market where he visited the shops dealing aquatic products. He found out that the fishmongers offered fresh fish from the river, whereas many other shops dealt in frozen good only. Unfortunately, the day was too windy for fishing boats to set out. He stayed in the city overnight and went to Tian's early the next morning when fishermen had just brought in their fresh catch. He picked several silver fish and some purple crabs the size of one's nail, and then put the fish in a pail with water and the crabs in a well-sealed basket. And without a moment's delay, he rushed to the railway station and caught the first train to Beijing, and made it there by nightfall and arrived with the fish and crabs intact. And so basically he foregone seeing his, he basically, instead of going to see his family, went and got the crabs and did all that. It's like, but it kept him the job, and he got a tip of $200 out of it. So anyway, Za basically still does not know what to do with his business and his monopoly. It says the financial situation of the family had gone from bad to worse since the Japanese surrender in 1945, when the Kuomintang government revoked its longtime salt monopoly. So basically the monopoly kind of goes downhill and it's no longer upheld. And so Sun Yao Ting basically convinces him to leave and go stay in the temple and get like a 3-bedroom home there. And so they end up doing that. He tries to convince him to quit opium as well, but him and his wife, him and his second concubine, are too addicted to it, so he doesn't end up quitting it. And then around this time, we find out that his good friend Chin sadly he fell and dislocated his hip, and they don't think he's gonna make it, which is so crazy because you think when somebody falls and dislocates their hip, you're like, oh, they'll be fine. But if they're in their 70s and 80s, that does become a legit concern health-wise. And so that's kind of where Chin's at. And so Sun Yao Ting convinces him to let him go stay with Chin to hopefully help him get better. But sadly, instead, his friend Chin ends up dying. The last part of the chapter talks about that as Chin's on his deathbed, he tells Sun Yao Ting, he's like, I know I'm not going to be long for this world, but you have to do something for me. I need you to oversee my funeral. Don't forget about my treasure. And he keeps telling him, don't forget about my treasure. At first, Sun Yao Ting doesn't realize what he's talking about, but then it comes to light that what he was referring to were his genitals, because all of the eunuchs, they called their genitals their treasures, and they kept them because it was part of a traditional Chinese burial that you're buried with all of your body parts, like your genitals included. Otherwise, you're considered that you won't be a complete person when you pass to the afterlife. And he says here, worst case scenario, you could be even reborn as an animal if you don't have all your parts there. So they managed to actually find the organs. They found the organs in like a briefcase in a back room. And I was like, oh my God, they were like wrapped up in all this cloth and they were withered, but they were there. And so it says, they're like, let's go complete the body. So him and a couple other eunuchs, with Zhang's help, Sun Yat-ting put the treasure squarely between the thighs of Qin's body in the coffin. Is it the right place? Asked Liu. Yes, trust me, said Sun Yat-ting. And they're like, it should keep contact with the body. And at his instruction, Sun Yat-ting adjusted the treasure so that it closely adhered to the body. And then they had the funeral. So, just like this chapter was really interesting. It was like a whirlwind, and I was like, oh my gosh. But what's so interesting is to see that being an asshole is not only limited to royal families. I was just, what's so interesting is that a lot of the stuff that Sun Yat-ting talks about, like the wealthy people who don't know how to manage their finances, they just come into amount of wealth and they have no clue how to regulate it. And they just lead these extravagant lifestyles, but they have no clue what to manage. And so they end up like leading to ruin. That's stuff we see every day in our own lives. Like we see this stuff play out with real people. And a lot of times when you think that, oh, somebody's rich, they got all this money, they're well off. Not necessarily. And we see this play out in that book. And I thought that was really interesting. So anyway, I've talked for over 20 minutes, but y'all know that. I'm glad you enjoy this book. I feel like I'm going to get to the end of it by the time we finish this season. So that's going to be interesting. But in any case, we are going to start episode 18 of the Apothecary Diaries. I can't wait. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. Let's go. That's how I feel. That's how I feel with this episode. This episode was just like, so things that you thought were correct, and they're possibly worse than you thought. And it's like, oh my God. There was a lot in this episode that, they just went there and said and revealed. And it's like, okay, what do we do with this? So, oh my God. Okay, well, here we go. So we know that Lakan, we got confirmation that Lakan is MaoMao's bio dad. Not a real daddy. Loman's a real daddy. For sure. And he wants to like possibly buy her out. Excuse me? We'll talk about that here in a second. But yeah, so, nope. So, anyway, we're going to have to go through this episode chronologically. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my place and get distracted. So let's just go ahead and do that. Luckily, MaoMao does not dwell too long on the fact that Jinshi, she thinks, went to a brothel. And I'm like, girl, girl. Maybe, and we'll talk about that. But she confirmed, she's like, well, if somebody wanted to devalue a courtesan, then they would get her pregnant. So the theory is that Lakan, because he didn't or couldn't afford her mom, he got her pregnant. Now, there are some other things in the timeline that we're going to talk about, especially when it comes to the dream that MaoMao has that she thinks is a memory. We're going to talk about that because there's a couple things in the timeline that I was like, okay, where does this fall into place at? And they weren't adding up for me, so we're going to go through it. And I'm sure that the story, y'all won't have to correct me. The story is going to do that for me as we go through the next several episodes. But, and plus, one thing we have also established is that MaoMao's, not exactly a reliable narrator all the time because she has some conjecture and some other things. And so we have to kind of combine her testimony with Lakan. And so far it's matching up. There's just some timeline stuff that I'm like, okay. But she basically says that would be how you devalue someone. And then she's like, oh, well, isn't that where you're supposed to go? And he's like, oh, and she's like, well, now you'll excuse me. I'm going to leave and go home to my dad. And at first he's like, oh, he doesn't want to leave her. He's like, well, why don't you come with me? And she's like, if I go with you, then what's the point of you going to a brothel? She's like, what's the point of you going in there if I go with you? That would kind of defeat the purpose. And he's like, oh, sure. Okay, bye. And then she's like, okay, I pulled it off without any apparent emotion. Now, when she looks back there, one has to ask about the apparent emotion. She's like, go enjoy yourself tonight, good sir. Well, he didn't, because that's not what he was going to do. And the one thing in this episode was that I wanted him to tell her, or Suiren to tell MaoMao, that no, Jinshi did not go to a brothel. He's not been with all these ladies. You think that love is this transactional thing. That's not. I wish he would have told her. But it doesn't seem like she's dwelled on it, so maybe it's fine. Maybe she's not going to think about it and not going to weigh that in the future. But I was like, girl, no, Jinshi's not like that. Don't assume every man is like that. Anyway, so we'll put Jinshi over here with his thing. Is that Jinshi now knows. He knows MaoMao's relations with Lakan. He's privy on it. And also, what's interesting is that Lakan knows that Jinshi is related to the Emperor. That part was interesting because, I mean, people in the comments have kind of hinted at it, but that was, don't spoil, but people have hinted at it in the Discord and everything this entire series, so it's kind of unavoidable. But it does seem as if not everybody in the palace knows that Jinshi is the Emperor's brother, which does kind of baffle me because, again, he's been dressed like nobility and the royal family this whole time. How do they not know? But I guess they don't. I guess it's not public knowledge that Jinshi's the Emperor's brother, and they've been passing it off that the Emperor's brother is just sickly. I guess that's probably the weirdest thing about this entire series is like that personally doesn't make sense to me. You would think through hearsay and everything they'd put two and two together. I feel like that treats the characters like they're not as smart as they should be, but especially if they all work in an inner palace where gossip runs rampant. But we'll just treat that as whatever the show says. But that's the only aspect about this show that's kind of not realistic to me. I'm like, how do they not know that it's Jinshi? That seems like so obvious. Plus he has like his own eunuch. And he has his own house with his own servant. It just feels like everyone should know, but sure. We're going to go under the assumption that not everybody knows somehow, but Lakan knows. So we'll just treat that as that. Okay, whatever. But anyway, I was frustrated that MaoMao, because it was one of those things, it's like, is MaoMao, was she wanting to get away in the moment because she was, on the one hand, I think it's the romantic shipper in me that wants to imagine that she was wanting to get away because she didn't want to show Jinshi that she felt bad he was going to a brothel. But then the other part of me is like, MaoMao's not romantic like that. So another part of me is like, she didn't want to show that she was unhappy talking about the courtesans getting pregnant because that's talking about her own mom and she has personal connection to it. Which kind of sucks for MaoMao because it makes MaoMao, I'm sure in her own way, she already has like an inferiority complex where she believes that she's nothing and she's expendable. And Suiren kind of like talks her down off that ledge this episode, which bless you, Suiren. Love you. We'll talk about Suiren and Suire. We'll talk about them. But in any case, she kind of talks MaoMao down from where she's at. But MaoMao, you can tell, not only does she believe she's an expendable servant girl and she's not important and she doesn't want to be a courtesan and get sold off because her mom, she probably knows from experience, but also she thinks she's just a worthless bastard child. She wasn't wanted to begin with and she caused her mom to decline. So she just doesn't feel like she deserves to be there. And that sucks. And we'll talk about her and Jinshi's relationship and the parallels there here shortly. But as we leave, we get this flashback. Now, the timeline with the flashback, we see the mom in the bandages, affected by the syphilis, holding her down as an infant. And there's the pinky finger sticking out as she's a baby. And as the baby's crying, a tear strikes her cheek, which is from the mom. And she looks up with those big blue eyes that are clearly Lakan's. Because the mom's eyes are like like purple. And as she's holding and she has a knife, like she's going to strike the baby. And then she obviously probably hits the knife beside her and doesn't kill her. Right. So we have reason to believe that the mom, she was with Lakan. And then she had MaoMao. And then she tried to kill MaoMao, but did not. And she's been treated by Loman and kept in the annex. And MaoMao's been visiting her, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I'm wondering if, I mean, technically, the timelines would match up that around the time that she tried to kill Loman, this is probably around the time that Loman was ousted from the palace and probably took her in. And took MaoMao in during this process. I'm going to guess that this is around all the time the stuff with Jinshi was happening. This around Loman's got his hands in a lot of pots, and this is probably around the time all of this has happened, right? And meanwhile, Lakan, somewhere during this time period, Lakan found out about MaoMao. Now, we don't know exactly when Lakan found out about her. It could even be during her stint at the Rear Palace. We don't know. But he's been trying to buy her. And the madame says no, and she's not when MaoMao's possibly bringing her better customers through Jinshi and etc. She's not going to sell her off. So we're going to talk about that as well. But that seems to be the case. We're going to go back to that. We'll go back to her with her dad. I just feel like the dad, Loman, is such a sweet old man. He's so nice, and he took her in. He's so sweet and taught her all about being an apothecary. And so he's like, hey, can you go? And I feel like he gave her the package to take to her mom because it's her biological mom. He's like, you should go see her and spend some time with her. So she goes back to the palace. I don't know who this guy is. There's a random man working in the brothel house. I don't know if he's maybe the owner's son or whatever, but he's just randomly there, just working, having a good old time. No big deal, just a servant there. Now, Pyron goes back, and the madame is asking her to make a choice, and they talk a little bit about that. I like she suffocates her with her big boobs. She's like, you have to choose one or the other. And MaoMao's like, it's not my place to ask what this is all about, so not my business. And she says, Granny, you're so persistent. It's not your fault. It's your fault for not making up your mind. Now decide. You're the one making me bring these offers to you by hanging around. So I don't know if Pyron really likes Lihaku and the granny's asking her to choose Lihaku or not. Or if the offers that she's giving her, she's like, I don't want those. And she's just waiting for Lihaku to come back. I don't know. The granny and Pyron give off major Memoirs of a Geisha vibes with the woman that runs the house, the geisha house, along with the main geisha, and her name Hatsumomo and her like remind me a lot of Pyron and the granny, except Hatsumomo was quite more trifling, but she was such a great character. Anyway, so MaoMao, she's like, you're always so pushy. MaoMao sneaks by. I love MaoMao's chibis in her cat form this episode. They were great. They were glorious. And the guy's like, oh, and that's when the grandma's like, oh, MaoMao is even here. And they're like, she's going back to the annex. So anyway, we go back to the room where her mom is at. I thought her mom was in a coma the entire time, but she has syphilis. So let's just do, while we're here, syphilis symptoms. In the primary stage is a painless sore known as chancre, which appears on the genitals, rectum, or mouth. It heals in 3 to 10 days. The secondary stage symptoms are 2 to 8 weeks, which include a non-itchy rash on the palms and soles of feet, sores, raised gray or white lesions called condylolemata, Lada in moist areas, flu-like symptoms, weight loss, patchy hair loss, headaches, and swollen lymph nodes. The final and most severe stage of syphilis occurs, which can occur 10 to 30 years after the initial infection. 10 to 30 years. Okay, that makes sense why she's still suffering from it, because it's been like a decade. It says brain damage, dementia, cognitive health problems, heart disease, movement disorders and muscle problems, nerve damage, seizures, vision problems, including blindness. Well, that's not good. It says if it's found in its early stages, it is simple to cure when treated and found in its early stages. Which this was also back in times where, you know, they didn't have such cures. And MaoMao makes the point of saying that if her dad had discovered it in its early stages, they probably could have treated it. But he didn't know, because you don't really know some of the symptoms outright until it already is at a stage where you couldn't stop it. But it's crazy. So my thing is, it's like perhaps she's forgotten how to talk entirely. But she does do that humming, right? Her illness is worsening and her memory is in shreds. But she still wanted to play Go, which was so intriguing to me, that even after all that time, she still wanted to play that game. Lakan seems like he's such a sinister character. I think at the heart of everything, he tries to do like MaoMao does, and put up a wall of this is why I'm doing this. And he's trying to be the villain, saying that he's doing things because he's evil or because, he's just, this is the way he is. I think at the heart of the matter, he did love her, but his jealousy and his ugly personality completely overrid that love and made him do this horrible thing to her. Now, the question, of course, is, did this bitch give her syphilis as well? That's the question. Or did she already have syphilis when because that's the only part of the timeline that it's like, when did the syphilis come into play? Did she have the syphilis from Lakan, or did she get it after she had MaoMao? That's the part of the timeline that doesn't quite add up yet, and that we don't fully know, because she is shown, when she's shown trying to kill MaoMao, she has the scars and the lesions and everything, which would show that was when syphilis had taken root. But I'm like, did it start while she was pregnant with MaoMao, or was it afterwards? Or did it not, or did the lesions not showing up until after she had MaoMao? There's a lot of questions with that we don't have answers to yet, but I'm sure we'll get them as we go. But yeah, she gives her basically pain medicine to just give her some relief while she's there. Yeah. Meanwhile, she's like, this is the only thing we can think of doing. I like, meanwhile, we have the grandma running her calculations of her earnings and her wages. The granny doesn't strike me necessarily as an evil person, but she also, I don't trust her, because I feel like she's only in it for the money. And if she's racking up how much it's costing to take care of MaoMao's mom, it's like, well, how is MaoMao going to pay that back? And so I'm wondering if Lakan knows that MaoMao's connected and tries to buy her off, what are we going to do? And they said that customer is back again. And it's like, okay. It's like he's got a good nose on him. And he's like, get Mei Mei in here. So they're just trying to distract him with Mei Mei because she can play Go. Distract him so he doesn't keep... I feel like the grandma is also trying to protect MaoMao in a sense. I think she is out for money at the end of the day, but I think she is trying to protect MaoMao to an extent because she knows what a terrible person he is. So, but she's like, it's a reputable establishment now, but a decade or so ago, it operated in shame. This courtesan served customers during that era and was unlucky enough to catch syphilis as a result. Now, MaoMao speaks very objectively about her and doesn't call her mom. She says Ona at one point, which I wanted to look up Japanese and Ona because I did notice her saying that. I wanted to look that up. Japanese Ona terminology. Oh, what am I trying to say? It's Ona instead of... Yeah. So, Ona means female as an antonym of otako, which is male. How is it used? It's basically something very formal, right? Mm. Or maybe not. I'm very curious. It just seems like something very, like just a very generic way of saying woman. So, again, MaoMao knows that Lakan is her dad. Or at the very least, she knows that Lakan is the man that caused what happened to the female courtesan. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure MaoMao knows that he's her dad and that woman is her mom. But what's so interesting is that MaoMao, in an attempt to, like, for her own defense, and because no one has come out and said it, because it's all just theory, she kind of like separates herself from her mom and dad as like a coping mechanism, because she's like, well, who am I going to admit that my dad's this creepy military man and my mom was a courtesan? It's like, So then we see Loman come in. I like that it's raining outside when he shows up. By the time my dad came to the house, the illness was in incubation, so it means he didn't know. If he'd known about the illness, he might have been able to treat her. So we see all these women like lined up, and we see like, okay, there's also like a woman with blue eyes that's standing behind one of the other courtesans. I don't know who that is supposed to be. Is it Suire? I don't know. There is somebody with blue eyes that you can't really see directly behind her. Interesting. But there's also, I don't know if that's supposed to be MaoMao either. I don't know. Yeah, there is a woman. There is a girl in the back with blue eyes. I don't know. Maybe that's supposed to be Mei Mei. I don't know. She has bluish eyes. I don't know who she's supposed to be. I'm going to talk about Sweet Ray in a little bit. But yeah, there is a girl. Okay, no. Her hair's not green like MaoMao's. Her hair is kind of purple. So I guess that is Mei Mei in the back, maybe. Interesting. It's not MaoMao. But yeah, we see her. Wow, she's so pretty. She has a lot more. Her face is a lot more severe, though, than MaoMao's. MaoMao has like a cute little round face. Her face is a lot more like narrow and severe. But she has the green hair the same as MaoMao's. Interesting. And her back is turned from the others. She's so pretty. Nobody trusted a eunuch who appeared out of nowhere. And then we see these flowers, these purple and red flowers. She had to serve customers. There was no other way to live. Okay, so to me, that idea of her serving the customers, to me, that says that after having MaoMao, she probably was devalued. So to make up the cost, she had to serve other men, and from that's when she got the syphilis. So it could be that the vision that MaoMao saw at the beginning of the mom with the knife coming down might have been before she got syphilis, before she was actually bandaged up. It was just MaoMao merging the memories together. That was the law of the courtesan. A few years later, when the rashes started to appear, the sores almost spread instantly. Yeah. And it shows her with the red nails, and she's got like the blush in her eyes and all there. She's been locked up in this annex, out of sight of the customers. And she's like, well, that's pretty generous, because they could have just chucked her into a ditch and let her die. Ugh. And yeah, when she opens up the window and burns some incense, that's when she starts to hum. I'm going to be curious if Lakan hums the same song. And then, of course, MaoMao just looks at her. What does she say there? As she looks at her. She say foolish woman? No. So then the one girl says, she says, the weirdo with the monocle is here. Yeah, I like that nobody likes him. She's like, you shouldn't go out of here for a while. She's like, got it. So all those times she's been sitting in the corner waiting for them to get done, has it been because he's been there? Because then while she says, as long as I stay put, that man won't come out here. A longtime customer and old acquaintance. And like she's getting like the stones out like she's gonna play Go. Oh. Damn. And MaoMao just looking at her. Saying stupid woman. Yeah, I'm sure that she says that, like, why did you let it get this way? It's almost out of, and I don't think she doesn't know, MaoMao doesn't know that she played Go with him. Interesting. And then she just sits there waiting. And so the Mei Mei's like, well, he's gone now. I'm pretty sure that kid was Mei Mei because the kid's outfit had the colors that Mei Mei had at the time in the house. And then so she's like, well, did you spend time with them? And she's like, oh, well, who else can? I guess nobody else can play the games. And then she called MaoMao's mom Big Sis. You're getting that offer again. And she's like, oh, what, really? She's like, I don't know how you put up with him. So I guess that offer, maybe he was offering, maybe he was offering to buy her out and she was like, oh my God, no. They don't exactly explain that either. And she's like, well, the lady doesn't care as long as he pays up, so it's not so bad. That's probably why she keeps wanting to make me a courtesan, so she can get more money. Even if I didn't have my job, I might have been sold off by now. And she's like, well, from where I'm standing, it's a really good deal. How rare is it for a courtesan to get everything they want? Our Lady would easily let the weight of silver overrule that. I feel like Mei Mei maybe likes Lakan and likes playing with her and doesn't mind that. So I just hope Mei Mei doesn't have her heart broken because I don't think he's playing with her. He's trying to get back to, I feel like she might think that he's going to buy her out, Mei Mei, and I don't want her to get disappointed. I'm curious. Very curious. So she's like, I don't know what's going through Mei Mei's mind. It's not a rabbit hole that I want to delve into. And then this scene, she's like, if it's what everyone knows as love. There was this line here that she says, and when she's submerged, oh, that imagery is so good. She's like, that's an emotion I'm sure I left behind in the womb of the woman who birthed me. She's just so objective. She doesn't want to recognize Lakan as her dad for obvious reasons. She doesn't want to recognize that woman as her mom to connect all the dots together. But the saddest part is that the idea of love and this like uncertainty, not only this uncertainty, but the fact of it being transactional and the fact of it being like an exchange, and that it has to be something that has value attached to it. Like, those are all things that MaoMao, she just doesn't understand, nor does she doesn't find the fact if it's transactional. She's like, I don't like the idea of people buying people out. And she's like, I don't like the idea that love is uncertain, because she's someone that likes to like formulate in objective terms, and love is not objective. It can be very subjective and you can't calculate it and control it. So she's like, no, I'm out on that. And then she doesn't like it being transactional. And then she's like, she doesn't believe herself to be of value. So she doesn't like the idea that to be able to have love, there has to be an exchange or a business deal made. And to her, she's like, nope, I don't want that. And the thing that so sucks about it is that Jinshi, who's over here, doesn't care about any of that. Or at least he thinks that he doesn't. He's this romantic idealist. And I'm like, girl, no. What I said was going to be interesting was that you have MaoMao, who at an age was separated, in a sense, from her mom at an early age. Like, her and her mom, her mom went crazy because of the syphilis, and she got kind of uprooted and taken away from her. And what was interesting is that similarly, Jinshi kind of experienced the same thing. He was separated from his biological mother and taken away and raised away from her by Gao Shun and Suiren and the Emperor Dowager, and MaoMao was raised away from her mom by Loman. So it's interesting that her and Jinshi have more in common than they think. And his mom was a concubine, technically, so Jinshi and MaoMao's mothers were both concubines and courtesans, so They have that in common. They were raised away from their mothers and they don't really have a great relationship with them. So there's that relation to them. They are kind of estranged from their fathers in different ways, but similarly. So they've got that in common. I'm like, Jinshi, if you and MaoMao sat down and talked, you'd probably find that your families have a little bit more in common than you think, despite the social status that is different between the two of them. But I don't think MaoMao would want to sit down and talk about private family matters. Jinshi would sit there and write a novel about it, but MaoMao, that's not her style at all, you know? And so then Mei Mei's like, you know, let me scrub your back. And they have this little cute moment here with the sisters. Meanwhile, Jinshi's like, going out and seeing the brothel will help me at no way, shape, or form. I also like that he's like, I don't know what to do with this extra, like, pot, so here, you can have this. And MaoMao's like, oh, from a weirdo, huh? Well, there's been only one weirdo come around me lately, so it's probably him. She's like, I'm gonna get back to work. And Jinshi's like, And I think Jinshi was also kind of like, she didn't want to stay and talk about said weirdo because normally her curiosity would be piqued, but since she instantly was like, let's not talk about it, I feel like he was like, oh, that seems kind of odd for her and not like something she would normally do. And I think Suiwen notices it as well, right? So she's like, we're having a vegetarian dinner today. So no meat or fish. I wonder what the deal with the vegetarian dinner is. We'll talk about that here at the end of the episode. And she's like, hey, eyes up here. I like Suiwen's like, focus up here right now. But what does she say there? She's like, well, there's no more hiding weird plants in the warehouse. You can't make it your own medicine closet. She kind of has wavy hair too, but her eyes are a different color. I mean, obviously there's Sui Ren and Sui Rei. They sound like very similar names, but I'm like, would they be related? Could Sui Rei be related to Sui Ren? I don't know. We'll think about that here in a little bit. But anyway, she's like, you know, just because a person is of noble birth, it doesn't make them inherently different from the start. I feel like Suiren's trying to be like, you know, you and Master Jinshi have a lot more in common than you think you do. If you would sit down and talk with young Master, you know, he's kind of head over heels for you, but you seem to be quite oblivious to it and in denial of it. And she's like, oh, she's like, nobody knows how a person's life can twist and turn. And yeah, just because you start out wealthy does not mean it is going to end that way. Like, you never know. I mean, look at Jinshi and his life. She's like, really? So they sent her to go at medicine. The best part of the episode, one of the best parts for me was her at the pharmacy where she's just like, I'm around all this medicine. This is so exciting. I want to see all the things. I would love for her to go see all the things. I wish she could go around and see what's all there. Bless her. But she's so excited. And then that's when Sailor Neptune, Sui Rei, shows up. What's interesting here is that Sui Rei, I'm just noticing, has the same blue eyes that MaoMao has. So I'm like, is Sui Rei... She also is not very well endowed, like MaoMao, so that might be more of a dad thing than a mom thing biologically, by and by. Because my mother is a more well-endowed woman, but I do not take after her at all. I look like all the women on my dad's side of the family, so... I definitely took after that side, so it's very possible. But she has the same blue eyes, so I'm like, maybe her and MaoMao are half-siblings. Maybe Lakan tried to buy her out because she was a half-sibling, and he's trying to collect all his offspring so they can all be under his watch. Because their hair even looks kind of similar, too, right? And she kind of has a more severe face. I'm so curious. And she also has, like, the blue flower. Interesting. They call her a court lady. She says, I'm here to resupply the medicine at the guardhouse. So I guess she works for Lakan, so I guess maybe he bought her out or has her working for him. She kind of looks, I could see her being his daughter, honestly. Because the one guy's like, well, what a shame for her, a court lady, to be working in the military wing. And this pharmacist clearly has the hots for her because he's blushing the entire time he's talking to her. So interesting. I'm curious to know what her deal is and how she factors into this. And I feel like maybe she dislikes MaoMao because they're half sisters and she knows it. But I could be wrong as well. Anyway, so she's like, there's potato flour that she went and got for Jinshi. She's like, what is this? And so she's trying to piece together things. And I'm like, girl, figure it out. And she's like, well, things about Jinshi are pretty mysterious. you know, he gets assigned this random paperwork. He's doing stuff that upper nobility would do. He's taking long baths the day before and burning incense. What does it feel like in the vegetarian food? Like a purification ceremony. And then we see what I'm assuming is him with this, like, his hair up in this bow, in this like cap, and he has all these beads in front of him. Are eunuchs allowed to perform ceremonial rites? So I'm curious about that. Like, he has his hair up in the bun and he has this. What is that? She's like, it's not a place for a noble to do, but what if he's a high rank? But if he's such a high rank, why is he a eunuch? And I'm like, well, girl, he might not be a eunuch. We don't know. So vacation ceremony, China. Okay. So there are purification ceremonies in China. There is sukubai, which is a ritual cleansing takes place before entering a tea room. That's not it. There is temple purification. Don't think that's it. There is guan ceremony. Feasting and purification rituals of ancient China. What is this? Tell me your secrets. It says social role of food in the Bronze Age of China is defined by the relationship of a person to the supernatural, controls. What we get here? It says the cuisine of sacrifice united all generations of a family, dead, living, and unborn, into a whole community built on a continuous exchange of food and gifts throughout time. This is talking a little bit about cannibalism. I don't think we're doing that. I don't think that's right. Never mind. Oh my God. I don't know exactly which ritual we're talking about, but I feel like maybe next episode we'll find out more, but I'm not exactly sure. And she's like, was he made a eunuch by the unilateral decision of the previous Dowager Empress? Well, that part could be true, because in the book, the Empress did make some of the men out as eunuchs. So it could very well be that he was made a eunuch by the Empress. That very well could be. And she's like, you know, maybe he was like my dad. This could be. So then I think that Jinshi is like right on the cusp of figuring out that Loman is her adoptive father. I think he's like right there. And he's so close to figuring it out that, damn it, that's when Lakan shows up. And I love the face that Jinshi makes where he's like, son of a bitch, why are you here? Go away. He's like, leave, please. And he's like, should we pick up our discussion? Like, Lakan just wants to press buttons. He is just seeing how far he can needle at Jinshi and get away with it. And it is a lot. And he's like, well, it seemed you played a few dirty tricks. And he's like, I don't want to hear that from a thief. And I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, I spent a decade convincing that old madame, and you stole her out from under my nose. I'm like, oh my God. So he's like, he'd been trying to take MaoMao away all this time. And Jinshi, and he's like, oh, do you want your prize returned? He's like, oh no, I'll pay whatever you ask. And Jinshi's like hell, you're going to get her? No. I'm not keen on repeating my past mistakes. I don't like this all. And Jinshi's face, like, Lakan is just a terrible person. And Jinshi's like, I don't want to sell anybody to you. And he's like, well, then there's nothing I can do, is there? And so he's like, well, you can count on one hand the number of people who can defy someone as high up as you. And he just flaunts that like he knows who Jinshi is. And Jinshi's like, well, shit. He figured it out. He does. He's like, I'm just concerned about my daughter would think. That's all. And Jinshi's like, you son of a bitch. How dare you? He's like, so that's what it is. Yep. He's actually MaoMao's biological dad. Gross. And Jinshi's like, can you leave? I don't blame Jinshi for not liking him, because he's like, I just want to buy my daughter. And Jinshi's like, leave her alone. Gross. So I don't know. I feel he's obviously threatened by Jinshi, because Jinshi is high up enough to like basically he's rose up this ladder, but Jinshi's on a rung that's higher than him. So anyway. And so Jinshi tells her that someone wants to visit you. And she's like, who is it? And he's like, it's the weirdo I've been telling you about. His name is Lakan. And the moment he says his name, she's like immediately glares at him. Like the look on her face. And it took me a little while to get Crunchyroll to stop, but these are the images of what she looked like. She's super pissed. And she's like, I don't ever want to see that face again. I don't blame him for not wanting to see that face again. That's pretty terrifying, actually. Yep. Yeah, pretty terrifying. More terrifying than Lakan. And he's like, I've never seen her make that face, and I don't want to see it again. And she's like, so he found out. And I think what she was referring to is that Lakan found out that she's here. I don't think it's that Jinshi necessarily knows, because what she got from the conversation when Jinshi was like, oh, some weirdo named Lakan wants to see you. And she's like, shit, he found me. He found me here. But of course, she gets distracted by the herb garden. So there's that. Something else too that's interesting is, I wonder, she's like, oh, it's an herb garden. It's here and there. I almost wonder, with this girl with the wavy hair, like, would it be a twist if she was Loman's daughter from like before he became a eunuch? But I don't think that's possible. She has wavy hair kind of like Loman. We don't know Loman. Loman's eyes are yellow though. I don't know Suiren, aka Sailor Neptune's purpose, or how she's related, if she's related, but she's a very cryptic presence. And she like has this garden here and she's collecting herbs. And she's like, this is an unofficial garden anyway, but the doctors know about this place too. And so I advise against frequent visits. Basically, she's saying, don't be taking the herbs because the doctors, you know, might come out here and get some things. I don't know. I don't know Suirei and what her relation to all of this is, but her and MaoMao have the same eyes, which makes me think that they're related to Lakan, but her eyebrows are heavier. She has a different face, different hair. I don't know. And she's like, are you in charge of this place? And she says, who knows? I'm just allowed to plant what I want here. And I don't know. I'm so curious. She's pulling up all the weeds. Suirei. Curious. She doesn't seem very excitable. No, she's pretty hardcore serious. Yeah. And then she's like, what are you planting? And then she stops. And that's when, like, she says that she's planting a medicine to resurrect someone. And of course, MaoMao is like, a medicine to resurrect the dead? Well, I want to know what that is, because she probably wants to, like, you know, bring the dead back to life. She probably wants to help her mom. Or her dad, or Loman, whenever he dies. And she's like, I'm just kidding. She has a very dark sense of humor. And MaoMao's like, really? A joke? She's like, well, I heard you're an apothecary. Just how good are you? And MaoMao's like, I don't know. I have not had much comparison. She's so mysterious. So she says a little while from now I'll be planting some morning glories here. And she just leaves it at that. Like, it's the most cryptic thing in the world to say. And MaoMao's like, okay. And then she's like, bye. And MaoMao's like, what the heck? So I want to look up morning glories. Because we have a lot of morning glories here. They symbolize life transience and deep emotional bonds. The color indicates serenity, trust, mystery, and purity. So it says, what does it say here? The morning glory is believed to have originated in tropical regions. Its exact origins are a subject of debate among botanists. It's widely accepted this beautiful flower first appeared in Asia, specifically in China and Japan. The morning glory has a long cultural significance in these countries. In China, it's known as yaji and symbolizes happiness, love, and peace. It's often used as a decorative element during festivals and weddings. In Japan, the morning glory is called asagao, and represents the transient nature of life. It's also associated with good luck and protection against evil spirits. Both cultures appreciate the delicate beauty of the morning glory and its ability to bring joy into people's lives. Historically, they hold great significance in various cultures and represent aspects such as love, purity, and spiritual enlightenment. In some Asian cultures, it's associated with the idea of rebirth and resurrection due to its ability to bloom anew each morning, which might tie into her saying something to resurrect the dead by talking about morning glories. And they talk about rejuvenation. Interesting. I don't know why it seems so cryptic when she said that. I'm not exactly sure. I do know that morning glories, they are they're climbing vines. And so they are some that like kind of take over places. So I'm like, I don't know exactly why she said it in such a way. Maybe she's a lot more calm than she appears. I don't know. That was just very interesting. But yeah. Remember how I said I was like, oh, it'll be great when we get to episode 18 because then we'll just, have questions answered and it'll all be good. Well, we did have questions answered, but it's not good because now I want to watch episode 19. Dang it. So yeah, okay, fine. I'm going to wait to the comments for this week, I guess. But then it's going to be like immediately me wanting to watch episode 19. So there's that. Anyway, but I'll hold out. I'll be patient, I guess, and wait for this one. But in any case, I'm super excited to know your thoughts down below. And now it's like the baby's out with the bathwater. So what do we do with this? And I don't know. So anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with episode 19 of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye.